as we all know, skyrocketing housing prices, both kind of rental and sales, continue to be fundamental challenges in many cities across the world. And the issues are often very multi-layered and complex, really involving a myriad of stakeholders and conflicting interests. To address these challenges, I think innovations and disruptors, including prefab housing, have really emerged as part of the solution. So next up, we'd like to introduce the piece entitled Pre-Fabrication and the Housing Crisis in Hong Kong by Jeremy Pai, who recently graduated from the Masters in Urban Planning program last spring and is now working in the Bay Area. We also have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Bing Wang, Associate Professor and the co-head of the Real Estate Program at the Harvard GSD, who mentored Jeremy on this article in her class. And so the discussion will be moderated by Arshad Bawa, editor of this article from the Real Estate Program. Thank you.
Hi, George. Thanks so much for the introduction. So, I mean, I'm sure most of us have had the opportunity to read the article and, you know, get introduced to the entire idea of prefabrication. But I think the sort of, you know, the core purpose behind prefabrication is that it actually solves or at least it tries to solve a much larger problem. So that is of housing affordability. So I wanted to start off with by addressing housing affordability. And, you know, in cities like Hong Kong, New York, it really is a mismatch between demand and supply. So Jeremy, could you talk about, you know, the nature of the affordability problem in Hong Kong? How stark is it? And, you know, what are the demand/supply factors that contribute to this?
Certainly. Thank you, Arshad. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you very much. To broach the topic of affordability, I think a lot of the challenges that we see in Hong Kong certainly aren't unique to Hong Kong specifically. If we go to the first couple of slides, what we observe in Hong Kong is a very similar trend in many of the major metropolitan cities around the world, in that we're dealing with a very significantly growing population. And perhaps what's unique to Hong Kong is the fact that because it is an island, it has a really, really small percentage of developable land. At present, it's only about 4% of total land area is dedicated to residential use. So on one hand, we have growing demand, where we have approximately a population rate now of 7.5 million people, and most notably an elderly population reaching nearly 25%. Going then to the next slide, if you could, please. We then see that at the heart of, I think, the paper and really the challenge that I wanted to tackle is issues of affordability. We're talking about nearly 20% of the population living below the poverty line and making far less than what is really necessary to afford many of the apartments that you find on the private market. At the time of this paper in 2018, there are approximately 1.3 million people in Hong Kong living below the poverty line. And looking down later on the slide, we see that there's certainly a significant population that qualify for public housing, but the supply at present hasn't really been able to meet the demand. And so although there's many solutions that are being proposed, prefabricated housing is just one of the ones that have been proffered thus far.
Dr. Bing, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. So great to be here. Good morning, everyone. I know a lot of students who worked hard to get the publication out and also to organize this event. So congratulations. And also thank you to Professor Alex Van Hoffman, who has been the leader in the faculty advising for this effort. So Jeremy's article, the one benefits about it is it does not only examine affordability issue from the market demand and supply perspective. In his article, he also examined the socio-economic impact and what kind of institutional structure has led to this phenomena. So I will talk about three aspects about the affordability issue in Hong Kong. First, land ownership. As many of you may have known, other than the St. John Cathedral Church in Hong Kong, the rest of land belongs to the government. So with this kind of leasehold land system, government has a very significant role to play in the real estate market. Not only that it is the provider of the regulatory framework, but also the principal supplier of land, both for public as well as private sector development. And second, if we want to look at the housing supply mechanism, In fact, in terms of the public housing, public rental, that the government has been the builder, the producer of these low-income affordable housing rental. In fact, about 30% of the population are currently living in this type of housing units. And in addition to this, there are about 15% of the population live in subsidized for sale housing. So in total, 45% of the population in Hong Kong, they actually fully depend on the supply from the government side. So in that sense, that the number of the affordable units is not really a matter, but what matters is the quality of those units, and also most importantly is the affordability. And based on a survey done by the International Housing Affordability Survey carried out in 2018, that actually Hong Kong is regarded as the most seriously unaffordable market out of 91 major metropolitan areas throughout the world, including London, New York, Paris, all the others. And there is also a market structure concentration in this structure, namely the monopoly. As you probably know, that top 3 largest developers in Hong Kong, they provide roughly about 51% of the market rate housing year by year. That means it's going to be very difficult for any newcomers to penetrate into this market. So on the one hand, you have the government that's directly the provider of this the supply. On the other hand, you have this kind of a monopoly situation. And all these 3 aspects in terms of the ownership, the supply mechanism, as well as this kind of market structure that contributed to what we see the affordability crisis in Hong Kong. So I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much for those comments. And while I was listening to what you were saying, and while I was listening to what Jeremy was also saying, it came to me that this appears to be a market failure problem. When the traditional economics textbook would say that. And in this case, the market is failing to provide housing. But the question is this purely the responsibility of the private sector, or should the public sector be also responsible? And I think this then therefore introduces another layer to the debate about regulation versus deregulation. When you mentioned the fact that 3 firms in Hong Kong contribute 51% of the housing in Hong Kong, does that mean that the government should regulate the industry further, or should they deregulate and allow more competition to come in? So this provides a good segue into the second part of the discussion, which is what kind of policies do you think Hong Kong should adopt, and is there anything from best practices globally that one can learn from? Jeremy and Dr. Bing, both of you, please.
Certainly. It's a very, very challenging question. However, I will say that although there haven't yet been maybe very, very tangible, immediately tangible, although there haven't been very many immediately tangible, I think, policy implementations regarding specifically to prefabrication, I do know that you're beginning to see a trend, I think, in a response from the government, I think, to uniquely address some of the concerns of the population as it regards to housing. So we're seeing from a construction and development perspective, a greater emphasis on the demographic of people that it is trying to serve. Recently, there have been housing efforts that are more concentrated exclusively on providing for elderly populations, providing specifically for single adults. And I think, although there'll be certainly time, I think it'll take time to really implement any more significant policy changes, especially from a regulatory perspective, where we are beginning to see a concentrated effort as they recognize that this is a growing concern, and as the population continues to grow, it's going to become an ever more present significant challenge.
Yeah.
So if my comment would be, this is really the interplay between the government regulation and the market. On the one hand, there is this land supply constraints in Hong Kong. As you may know, that 37% of the land actually untouchable. in Hong Kong. That's for, environmental conservation. So that's basically leave 63% of the land of already, tight territory to support close to 8 million, population. And so government, I would think that there are two aspects of the obligation. On the one hand, they do need to encourage, providing incentives to private suppliers to, produce more of the affordable social housing. For example, that as we know in many other markets, there is the inclusion of social housing in the proposed private development sites as a condition of the planning permission. So in that sense, even though, the government in Hong Kong directly participating in providing the houses, but policies like providing incentives to private sectors like this one could be adopted. And on the other hand, it's really a matter of how to change, which is, how to change the market structure, which is obviously, not for faint heart either. That to some extent, Hong Kong, we all know, if you look at the top richest, families in Hong Kong, you'll realize probably half of them are from the industries related directly to real estate. So it's actually currently it is at a situation that the economic, structure does not encourage competition, in terms of, innovation or, technology application, but it's the old families controlling the supply of the housing, which drive the price to be higher. So therefore, to some extent, there needs to be a breakthrough in terms of the interaction between the market and the government to really encouraging a more diversified economic structure, which will help this situation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Bing and Jeremy, for your time.